So speaking of people who believe fake news, um, I like to address uh, more of what Rabbi Lichtenstein had said before, and that I had begun to address now. So they commentators pointed out that it's not fair because I was just listening to a 2 minute clip that some leftist had put online. I should listen to the entire shir. And I believe, yes, it's only fair I should listen to it. Well, actually, it was a drasha. It was Rabbi's drasha on Leil Yom Yerushalayim at Har Etzion. So I listened to it. And first of all, I'd like to ask my forgiveness because it looks like Rabbi Lichtenstein seems to have suffered a stroke. He's really not holding himself right. It looks like he suffered some sort of paralysis on his right side a little bit. I hope I'm wrong. So he should feel better. Now, he began by saying, and by the way, this became a treasure trove of ideas that I feel need to be rebutted. He said Israel is losing its legitimacy, and that's an existential threat. Israel is losing legitimacy. Now, legitimacy is a good word. I don't know how you say that in Hebrew aside for legitimiyut. By Hebrew, I mean older Hebrew. But then again, you read especially the Talmud, and even more so, let's say the Medrash Rabbah. The Medrash Rabbah is just full of Greek and Latin loanwords. But this isn't one of those words that Chazal took on then. It's a relatively new, I think it's more French, right? Legitimacy, the Bamia Tsarfatit, nachon? Legitimiyut. Yeah. It sounds like it started with French and made its way to English. But either way, you do not have uh, a term, as far as I know, that Chazal would have used for such a thing. Okay. So let's think about that for a minute. Legitimacy. What is legitimacy? Legitimacy is like recognition, which also itself is anglicized Latin there. What is recognition? Well, King David enjoyed recognition. That is, when he took the throne, he got the support of other kings. It says that there were those who approved of him, especially Hiram Melech Tzor. Solomon enjoyed legitimacy internationally because he was such a it says kashrut. Oh, okay, kashrut. That's talking usually about food. In this case, legitimacy is, I guess, peers recognize one as one of them having certain rights and I guess entitlements that members of the club have. So he says Israel's losing that. I didn't know Israel had such a need, by the way. Like I have not seen, for example, in the Talmud or in the Sifrei Musa or any place like this, that Am Yisrael has to watch out and make sure that whatever they do, they have sort of a cultural approval or a political approval from the surrounding nations. As a matter of fact, I thought it was reversed that Am Yisrael is supposed to lead by keeping the Torah and serve as a light unto the nations. But then again, so I think he's stuck in his conception. What that whatever Israel's doing is losing legitimacy. Somehow or other, we're not doing this war right. I don't know what his criticism is. We're not doing enough to sustain our international legitimacy, and that's why I want to ask him: did Israel actually do anything wrong? It's very easy to criticize, say you're losing legitimacy. Perhaps he could tell us what we're doing. Okay, and by the way, I myself am a critic of what the military and political establishment are doing this war. I think they're not hitting hard enough and just doing it, getting it over with. But he hasn't said, does he want that? I don't know. But he's just saying somehow or other we're losing our legitimacy, as though he's believing something that they're saying about what the army's doing. They must be doing something wrong that everybody's upset about. But what is everybody upset about? Apparently, the Americans and the international left say, apparently we're conducting a genocide. Does he believe that we're doing something wrong? Then we're actually projecting that? I don't know. Uh, has Israel done anything beyond that which it had no choice to do? No other choice. And by the way, Rashi wrote in his first comment on the Torah that we do not look to the nations to grant us, let's say, legitimacy or right to the land. Right? What are we supposed to say? They tell us we don't have a right to this country. What are we supposed to tell them? Say, we look to God and his prophets, and especially to his Torah from the greatest of his prophets. And we're supposed to show them, look, this is the way of the world. Conquest happens. And God chose to give us this land. We don't need legitimacy. God gave it to us, and it's our job to make it ours. Okay, I don't know. I guess I must have missed the chapter about maintaining international legitimacy there in the Mishnah Torah someplace, but perhaps we could write a sefer about it and then will become part of the Torah. My biggest disagreement is what he described as the biggest problem facing Am Yisrael. And he said that the biggest problem is like that clip, Otzma Yehudit. Now, I thought that this was the ultimate straw man argument. He himself heads an institution that proudly sends, or more accurately, sacrifices its best graduates to project Jewish military strength against the enemy. It's a Hesder yeshiva. They've taken quite a lot of casualties in this war. So they train Jews to take up arms and fight to defend Am Yisrael and the land. And when they do that, they assume it's L'Shem Shemayim. Baruch Hashem, I think that the Gush has produced, the Gush and Gush, as we call it. The Gush is the group of towns there. Gush is American slang for his yeshiva. It's produced many fine soldiers, and I fully support the soldiers. I'm very proud of them, the ones who fight L'Shem Shemayim. But then he says the Otzma people arrogantly believe only in Jewish strength, as though what Ben Gvir and company don't have the intention to keep the Torah. It's like we're keeping the Torah and we're projecting the strength. They're just all about militancy. Well, that's not true. That's why I called it a straw man argument. Misrepresent the other argument and then knock it down. So the choice of the word Otzma that they have is not because that is the gist or the limit of their policy and intentions, but because they realize that this, as the rabbi called it, rudderless and directionless ship that is the country of Israel at the moment needs to move in a more belligerent direction, because for too long it has been helmed by, parties and elements that are too pacifistic and too nebbishy, like the rabbi himself represents. He himself says it. Our derech is to be basically nebbishy and nerdy and not stand up for ourselves. Gullus Jews, basically. And that is how we must remain, which doesn't really make much sense. That is, within that type of argument, this is the way we do things, and we have to have this attitude of Gullus Jew, which is basically what he's describing. So that's what we have to maintain. With that type of attitude, we should have stayed in Gullus. There shouldn't have been a state of Israel. There certainly not have been a resettlement of the Gush and a rebuilding of those Jewish homes there. Certainly not the founding of a Hesder yeshiva in the Gush. I wonder if he understands the irony of what he is saying. And by the way, I'm surprised that he calls it the biggest threat that's facing us, because that's not the biggest threat that's facing us. Only if you read Haaretz on a regular basis and actually, drink when it comes to brainwash like Haaretz, you're only supposed to rinse with the brainwash. You're not supposed to swallow it. And you can even check it. For sometimes every now and then they actually have actual facts. If they could show you actual, documentation of what they're trying to say, then you can believe it. But you certainly shouldn't be taking your opinions from there. So I like to suggest what I believe is the biggest problem facing Am Yisrael today, and that is basically Nazism, Amalek, eliminationist anti-Semitism. So that's the proximal manifestation of the biggest threat. They're killing us right now. Well, actually, we've seen on Shmini Atzeres, they murdered many Jews and kidnapped more and started this war. And every single day, they are having violent attacks on Jews. Maybe you don't hear about it because you're reading the wrong news sources, which is why you should get in touch using some non-official media to see what your neighbors, my neighbors here, are reporting all the time. They were setting fire to basically every place that's open and grassy. Matter of fact, another blood libel, they were setting so many fires, they actually set a wildfire that consumed many of their automobiles. That was in a makeshift parking lot they had. There's like a little grassy area where they parked all their cars. So basically burned up all their cars. And of course, that's also blamed on those right-wing settlers. But the underlying problem, I guess, in Bidei Shemayim, in the God's court, so to speak, is our failure to keep the entire Torah. We are failing to keep the entire Torah, especially the part which explicitly includes the order to drive out our enemies. Okay? And it says, if you don't drive out your enemies, you're going to suffer this. So maybe that's our biggest problem right now, and perhaps it is. That's the one that's actually killing Jews. That's the one that's actually plunged us into this war. How many Jews have been removed from their homes? As far as I could tell, there's a lot of fires going on in the north, and a lot of towns have been certainly depopulated and slowly being destroyed. And there's nothing going on there. Apparently, they kill big shots in Hezbollah. I told my wife, I don't believe it. I'll tell you why I don't believe it. They say they got the commander of this and that, the commander of that and that. Okay, the second they kill them, so they just promote someone else. Now you're in charge of this rocket launcher, whatever it is. What does it matter? As long as they're still the ones who are producing within the ranks, and as long as we haven't taken over that place and completely destroyed the enemy, they're still a threat to us. By the way, I'd like to give a kaf suchus. I give him the benefit of the doubt in this case. He has a tradition that he got from his father. They're using texts of the halacha, especially the Rambam, that apply this rule specifically to the Canaanites, driving out the enemy and taking over the land. And if you don't leave them around, they're going to harm you. So they say it's talking about the Canaanim, but they hold that for some reason it doesn't apply to any other national non-Jewish group, such that those today we suddenly have to be mamish leftists toward them. And by the way, he mentioned that there's a Ramban there. Ramban says you have to watch out. I don't have the exact Ramban in front of me. He says there doesn't the Ramban tell us that if we do not treat conquered peoples properly, we deserve gullus. That we have to be kind toward conquered peoples. I'm surprised that he mentions that because, like the Ramban Nachmanides, when he says we have to treat the conquered peoples properly, he doesn't mean as first-class citizens. He means as second-class citizens, which is also brought by the Rambam. They have to, and also they have to be b'nei Noach. That is, they have to give up on the idolatry. They have to accept the mastery of the Torah and of the Jewish people and these 7 commandments. And one of those is, by the way, no shfichus damim. If we were to have a national group that is aspiring to destroy us and has a religion, hold on, I'll get to the question, has a religion that basically has replaced God with bloodshed, that is basically their religion. So we do not have any obligations toward them to make sure to treat them nicely. Adarabah. We have to defend ourselves from them. We have to get rid of such people. So I'm surprised that he would mention such a thing, that somehow or other, once again, he's stuck in his belief. He thinks that we have troubles coming upon us because for somehow Am Yisrael as a whole has mistreated those people who have become subject to Am Yisrael. Now, by the way, just to know, since 1967-60 perhaps you do have some hothead Jews who were, rightfully so, by the way, keen on expelling all the conquered peoples, just getting rid of them, and perhaps that could have led to peace. But on a whole, the policy of the state of Israel and the government and the Jewish people was to just let them be and settle among them and show them, perhaps, look, we'll offer them peace, be good neighbors, economic opportunities, and they'll want to live in peace with us. And how well has it worked out for us? But in his world, he's imagining that somehow or other, we have been, on a whole, not nice to them. We've been oppressing them. I can't think anything farther from the truth. But then again, if you have this strange perception of what history was, so you're going to come to these conclusions. Why were we not commanded to expel other nations besides the 7 nations, like the Plishtim? That's a good question. Esoterically speaking, God gave the land of Israel to the Jews, right? This could be a good shir. And he says at the beginning, before God describes all the descendants of Noah and the various nations, he gives a primordial story, a story that explains tendency in this world. There's Shem, Cham, and Yefes. And Cham is the father of Canaan. Cham and Canaan apparently victimized Noah. We mentioned that. What exactly they did, it seems to be something of a sexual nature that was really improper. And Shem and Yefeth took care of their father. Now, what happened was, look at this. Yefes was sort of rewarded. He wasn't the initiator. Shem was rewarded. And it said that Canaan would be a slave unto them. So Avram Avinu, as the prime seed of Shem, was given the land that Canaan inherited. Canaan took over this area, the Levant, and he had many descendants, a few sub-tribes, and those were being basically held on, I guess, in deposit, basically, until the Jewish people, the descendants of the proper and true descendants of Abraham, would become fitting to own that land. And also the Canaanites had the most corrupt culture. Their culture mixed avodah zarah and shfichus dam, and the worst type of avodah zarah. Their avodah zarah was the fertility cult, the Baal, and related idols that involved Gilui Arayos. So they basically had a system of religion that combined the 3 worst of eras. Their religion was shfichus damim with child sacrifice and the like, and Gilui Arayos altogether. So they were the worst of the worst. Their sins were poisoning Eretz Canaan specifically, in the world generally speaking. So it was our job to go to the land of Israel and take over the place. Those Canaanim who would ship up could stay, and those who could not had to shape out or fight to the death. The Plishtim were not Canaanim. The Plishtim are descendants of a different national group altogether, as described in other places. And they're just rivals for control of the land. And that's what you get from studying the books of Joshua, even Genesis, and the books of Shoftim. So the Plishtim represent the ultimate non-Canaanite group that we have to fight. The Canaanim, when we engage in war with them, we have to, unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, we have to. Yeah, I'll get to that question in numbers. We have to kill all of them. It says. Now, this is an uncomfortable part for people to hear, but the Torah does say that, with regards to making war with Amalekites and Canaanites, like you mentioned before, the women and children are not spared. Whereas when we fight other national groups, only the males, the fighting age males, are killed. The women and children are basically taken as indentured servants, or as what they call slaves, but really not. Whatever it is, they're basically converted to Judaism to a certain extent. So when we see the Plishtim at the beginning of the book of Judges, for example, they're treated in a different category. They're rivals for control of the land, and we have to fight them. And that's why they're there. The Plishtim represent every national group with whom we have fought over this land since then. The Romans, the Greeks, sometimes the Egyptians. The Egyptians attacked after Solomon's time. The Persians, you name it, the Crusaders, the Islamic conquests. It teaches us that even if we have gotten over this problem with the Canaanim, and we have made the land Eretz Israel and not Eretz Canaan anymore, and even if the Canaanim have disappeared from history, like the Rambam says, rightfully, there's no more Canaanim around, so there's no more war against the Canaanim, we still have Plishtim or whoever. By the way, Plishtim wasn't their national name. Plishtim is just a native Hebrew word meaning invaders, right? Invading peoples, like sea peoples, and that the Egyptians had to deal with. So we have Plishtim. So yeah, we're supposed to fight the Plishtim. David HaMelech and Shaul and Shimshon and those who came before them and those who came after them. The war with the Plishtim was ongoing. They are rivals, and we have to fight in order to control this land. And that's the way it's been until then. So we have to learn this lesson. And so what do we learn? In Numbers 33, 52, 53, not referring to inhabitants in general, that's what I'm trying to say. It does. It doesn't say there, because it's talking about Yoshevei Haaretz Mipnechem. It's not talking about specifically Canaanim. They're not mentioned by name. And it talks about driving them out. Driving them out. Okay? Gerush. Okay? Getting rid of the rival nations is something that is, I guess, the common denominator. It is in common. It's a rule that applies to every single non-Jewish group, not just the Canaanim. If we were talking about the Canaanim, it would have said kill all of them. But here it just says, generally speaking, forever. Just like the rabbi said, the tochacha is forever. In every generation, there will be groups that will fight with us for the land. And it's trying to teach us, if we want to succeed and control the land, then we cannot allow rival nations to have a foothold here. We should not allow them to live in our borders. We definitely should not allow them to exist within our society or neighboring us if they have not given up on their national aspirations. By the way, that's part of what it means. To be a ger toshav, a ben Noach keeps the 7 commandments abroad. A ger toshav keeps the 7 commandments in the land of Israel. And one of the conditions, ger toshav, what does it mean? He's a stranger, but he's a settler here. It means he has to accept the fact that we are in charge. And that's certainly not the case, by the way, with many of these people who are giving us our problems today. Just take the example of the people in the area, whatever it was. They thought they were making friends with their neighbors, and they were being excellent neighbors to them and sharing their parnasa, sharing everything with them, even their ambulances. And look what they got. We did not allow the Plishtim to say, well, technically speaking, in a sense, we did. We didn't want them, but the people were lackadaisical. They did not have, I guess, complete enthusiasm and the wherewithal to get rid of the Plishtim. And then it says at the beginning of Judges, so they allowed the Plishtim to persist, and that became a stumbling block for them. That became a test. It says they left the Chameshet Sarnei Plishtim, the 5 strongholds. Saran was a local ruler, I guess the king of the city-state that the Plishtim had. So sometimes Saran means the actual ruler, and sometimes it's a reference to that city, the Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gat, Ekron, and Gaza. So the Jewish people suffered. That started to be the nucleus, such that by the time we get to the latter part of the era of the Judges, the Plishtim took over. They basically were the rulers of the land of Israel. They didn't take over every single city, and they allowed us to stay. Oh, good. They allowed us to stay. And by the way, they practiced gun control because they didn't let us have weapons. And that was a big problem for like a century until finally King David's time. We were completely able to throw off their yoke. That's why what makes him the ultimate Messiah figure. That's why he's the Messiah that we're waiting for is basically modeled after King David. As we pointed out a few months ago, that is when in history Gaza finally became a Jewish city. In the olden days, the five cities of the Plishtim were mostly not in the hands of the Jews, and not only that, they made it harder for the neighboring Shevet Dan to actually take the land that he was supposed to. The land that we call Gush Dan nowadays, that was given to the tribe of Dan, starting from around Beit Shemesh area, going all the way to the coast. That was supposed to be Shevet Dan's area. And the problem was that the coastal areas that were supposed to be Shevet Dan sort of were uninhabitable. They somehow couldn't get their act together and get rid of the Plishtim and some of the Canaanim who were there. So they had to go north, find a new place to live, which was easier to conquer. Yeah, interesting part of history. But it was then in King David's time and afterwards that Gaza finally became a Jewish city. Now, in Second Temple times, Jews lived in those places also. And even today now, where it was supposed to be just like Ashkelon and Ashdod were completely Israeli cities and still are Israeli cities. What God had wanted all along was that entire area, including Gaza, to become Jewish. But we failed in this respect because we did not make it Jewish. We eventually could not live there. And then we lost control of the place. And now they attack us from there. That's basically what happens. If you do not do like the rabbi says, if you do not have teshuvah, and then kibush, gerush, and hityashvut, so you lose it in that order. First, you won't be able to live there. And then they'll kick you out. And then they'll start conquering you. And that's what happened with Gaza. And that's what's happening in the north right now. Everything's receding. So we did not allow the Plishtim to stay. Well, there were perhaps some of us who wanted to, but Tachlis, Am Yisrael, didn't do a good enough job getting rid of the Plishtim. And they paid the price for that a few centuries later, for about a century. And I'm hoping Am Yisrael has matured enough to learn these lessons, just like others are saying we should get out of the whole Oslo thing. Oslo was a terrible idea. I told you the story. Did I tell you guys the story about when they signed the Oslo Accords? They took us out of school to the auditorium to watch the signing happen, and I was really confused as a kid. I said, well, ridiculous. Why are adults wanting to watch such a thing? It doesn't make much sense. These are sworn enemies of the Jewish people. This is obviously a trick. But whatever, adults were too optimistic, or I guess they were too desperate for something to change. They had been through too much war, too much intifada, whatever it may be. They lost their spines. Okay. And by the way, he also said that's not our Darkenu. Yiftach is not our Darkenu. I don't know about that. He's not a Shmuel. Yiftach was not a Shmuel, but we'll take what we can get because the sage's criticism of Yiftach, one of the latter judges, was not his militancy and his tactics. He was considered a Jewish hero, and he fought God's wars. His problem was his amaratzus. For example, what he ended up doing to his daughter. And not only that, Bar Kokhba says, we don't want the Judaism of Bar Kokhba. You should know the Judaism of Bar Kokhba, he was the model Messiah, at least for Rabbi Akiva, and like the Rambam says, the majority of the sages, until he gave up on God. But at the beginning, when they were behind Rabbi Akiva, when the Rabbi Akiva and the sages backed Bar Kokhba, he was what we wanted. I like that Judaism. I wish, as a matter of fact, if Rabbi Akiva were among us today, and another Bar Kokhba figure arose, and he was at least doing things l'shem Shemaim, then Rabbi Akiva would call him the Mashiach. Okay, so I'm a little bit here. Yiftach was in fact more diplomatic than Samuel. Yes, correct. Yiftach did also. He was smart. He tried to negotiate out of this. But then one of the guys say, "Give us your land." What was Yiftach's response? Yiftach sent messages to the king of Ammon. Let's talk this out. And the king of Ammon said, "Land for peace," which is kind of, by the way, when you think about it, it means basically extortion. You give us land, and then we'll have peace. You know, it's like I hold a gun to your head. And give me your money, and you'll have life. Okay, so that's land for peace. And Yiftach could not handle that, by the way. Matter of fact, I wish. I said this every time that it comes, Parshas Chukas comes around, and we read the Haftarah. If only 30 years ago, when this whole Oslo thing was signed, and since then we've been suffering for it, there has to be a Jewish leader like Yiftach who says land for peace is nonsense. That's extortion. We will not have it. I'm willing to fight in the name of God to make you go away. And that's what he did. So there you go. I find it also funny. He says he wants the Judaism of Shmuel, by the way. Shmuel did fight the Philistines very well, and he retook some cities, it says. And he eventually appointed a king, a Jewish king, Saul. That was his main disciple, Saul, and he commanded Saul to do what? Go engage in a genocide against the Amalekites. So yes, I don't know. I guess Rabbi Lichtenstein says we want that type of Judaism. I'm all for that, but he doesn't realize that he's specifically shouting against that type of Judaism that would take Shmuel Navi type of approach to Am Yisrael's enemies. Remember, Shmuel Navi, his chiddush as Navi was telling the king, not only do you have to kill the men, not only do you have to kill the women and children, you even have to kill the animals. Okay, that was a one time, actually maybe a two-time commandment from God. So yeah, I like the Judaism of Shmuel. I think we could benefit from having a little bit of Shmuel in here, but apparently he has a different view of what Shmuel Navi stood for. So I saw that my guess is based on his expressions that he's just rooting for the blue team and he feels threatened that the blue team will lose. And he talks about ostensibly observant Jews attacking others, but he doesn't give any examples. Uh, so I find that that's another reference to this blood libel. Some or other, there's violent settlers and youths, Kahanis, who, according to at least official outfits, are engaging in violence, as we said. And whatever you might find, by the way, is self-defense. Why? Because just like the people in Gaza envelope found out, the IDF is not protecting the Jews in these areas anymore. It's the people themselves, their local militia, or they're not calling themselves that, but that's basically what it is. It's the local security apparatus and just individuals who are protecting themselves. And anybody with eyes and ears in this world knows that, just like in every other generation, the Jews are not the aggressors. Okay? Painting Jewish people as the aggressor, especially from Jews who are just trying to live as they always had, and from Jews who are living the spirit of our greatest Jewish heroes, to call them the aggressors is some sort of sick fantasy, and he'll have to apologize to them, if not in this world, in the next world. He brought an example, militancy. We shouldn't have militancy. The halacha says that on Shabbos, one can wear his clothing when walking in the public domain. One cannot carry in the public domain. So what about ornamental articles of clothing that are not necessarily clothing, like my tie? It doesn't actually help me dress in any particular way. Even a yarmulke, by the way, just a yarmulke is more ornamental and symbolic than, let's say, a hat, which one might actually wear because of utility, right? So the halacha says that that which is ornamental can be worn on Shabbos, and if it's on one's person, it is not considered as though he is carrying that item. If he has keys and money in his pocket, that's carrying in the public domain. That's a desecration of the Sabbath. But if he's wearing a tie or a very nice watch that's blingy, so that's ornamental. Question about your glasses, by the way. So what about a sword? So back then, a sword was a weapon. That's not ornamental. I think nowadays they do make ornamental swords. It's a very Esav Dick type of thing to do. We mentioned this before. Anybody here in the United States Marine, they have swords as part of their dress uniform. I do not know if they sharpen them or actually have any use for them in actual battle. So the Torah says that a sword is not an ornament on Shabbos, teaches us that whereas Gentiles might think that way, certainly in England and in Arab countries, basically militant Europe and in the Near East, that is considered. I bet you also somewhere in the Far East, like in Japan, weapons are considered ornamental, right? But for us, it's not. And that we can't cut the stones of the altar with iron. Why? Because iron is used to make weapons. It shortens man's life. So that's a straw man argument again. Why? Because his opponents don't just stand up for that. He says that he trains young men to serve in the army, and that's fine. But if we have other people say, yes, we also want to have a Jewish fighting force, but we want to use it a little bit more in a little more hardline manner than he does, now they're violent extremists. We all agree, we're all Jewish, and including the right-wingers, we all agree that the stones of the altar should not be cut with metal, and that carrying around weapons on Shabbos is just that. It's carrying, it's not an ornament. To say that, those people to my right, they're the problem. They're the violent ones. They're making everything worse for us. That's the problem. And then he said that the dream of settling Gaza is irrational and therefore improper for us to consider, basically addressing the rabbi's own opinion here. I don't understand why that's irrational. But then again, saying that trying to conquer part of the land of Israel and then settling it, that's irrational. It's not a real life idea. That is an ancient opinion, by the way. That's an ancient Torah opinion. It's the Torah opinion of the Meraglim. The one that the Torah says, yes, you might be rational and say, look, this whole promise of going to the land of Israel and conquering the people and then driving them out and settling land, you might go and say that from a rational standpoint or from an ethical standpoint, whatever your standpoint might be, a Meraglim standpoint, that might be the right position, but that's what God wants, and we'll suffer if we do not do that. So, yeah, I think there's a lot more that he has to say here. He also says that we have to be very real world now because of the situation of how lowly we are. We don't have a temple. So that's kind of a problem. I think this is a philosophical drawback. He's basically saying we have to realize how much in a lowly position we are, and that God isn't going to allow us to have victory because of our, I guess, spiritual state. So, as we also saw previously in history, this is a great self-fulfilling prophecy. If we had felt this way in the past, then there never would have been any great Jewish hero. There wouldn't have been a David HaMelech, there wouldn't have been a Yehuda Maccabee, or State of Israel, or Yom Yerushalayim for that matter. We can't go and say, by the way, let's start with the pasuk. That which is hidden from us, that's for God to deal with. But that which is revealed to us, that's what we're supposed to do. So we're not allowed to go and say, you know what? I don't think we have the merits. The time is not right for us to conquer the land of Israel, defeat our enemies, build the temple, found a state, leave the gullahs. How do we know? So we have to be suffix. We cannot allow that to happen. Yeah, okay, we can't allow it to happen. Or we can take the Maimonidean approach and look at the commandments and say, God wants us to keep the commandments. And the commandments involve having a country, fighting our enemies, securing our borders, settling the land of Israel. Or as the Ramban says, making sure it's not in the hand of any others. Well, that's a well-known Ramban. And we should just go and try to do that. He also mentions that we need leadership that protects Jerusalem. So, okay, yes, we need leadership that protects Jerusalem. But I think also, yes, and the rest of Am Yisrael and also the rest of Eretz Yisrael. This reminded me of those who celebrate Yom Yerushalayim because of the Kotel. Why do you celebrate Yom Yerushalayim and not Yom Hatzuv? Because we got back to Kotel. That's his romantic way of thinking about it. Okay, so we got back to Kotel. So what? Well, that's what you're celebrating, not the fact that Am Yisrael survived or they have a chance to build a Beis Hamikdash. What about the rest of Eretz Yisrael? The Beis Hamikdash. So what about Gaza? Gaza's part of Eretz Yisrael. We're supposed to control that also. Why are people just so giving up on it? So I don't understand why he is insistent on saying that, trying to go a little bit farther with the same army. We all agree we need to have a war in Gaza. We need to defeat the enemy there. But going a little bit farther and saying, and the civilian population will eventually have to be told, go away so we could settle that, just like they did in the Gush. No, that's too far. I guess he must be a Navi or something.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.